Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pastoral Thoughts Podcast. This is your host, Jack Young. And today we've got, I'm excited about this episode. We are introducing a Pulpit Committee guide, and we have the author of this. It's a really amazing booklet here, Brother Bob Smith, and he's down from Watertown just for this episode. I appreciate him journeying over here. And then Pastor Craig, every time one of his grandkids has a graduation party, we do a podcast.
That's right.
and so Felicity's having a graduation party today. So congratulations to her. And so I'm glad this worked out.
Yes, it's pretty cool.
And Pastor Craig has been able to fill in to several different churches who have been looking for a pastor. And he's able to accommodate Fellowship Baptist Church up in Watertown. And now, Brother Smith, you tell us a little bit about Brother Ref, because he was there for 20 years.
He was there for just over 20 years, and he had to have open heart surgery, and he had a very successful surgery. And his wife was ill, and she was in the hospital in Watertown, so she couldn't even go visit him. Anyways, he came home. He preached in February, a couple great messages, said he was feeling the best he's ever felt. He went to visit his wife, and while he was visiting her, something happened, and he could tell something was going on. And the nurse took his blood pressure, and his blood pressure had plummeted. Wow. And so within a few weeks, he passed away. He never made it home again. So.
And Brother Earl Ref pastored there in Watertown, and I was on the other side of town, probably about 25, 30 minutes away at the First Baptist Church in Black River. And Brother Ref and I got to be good friends, and he was just kind of like a father figure, just a solid pastor. I drove back up there for his funeral, and it was just an amazing man of God. And so your church had a 20-year stint where it was not looking for any
We weren't looking for a pastor. In fact, I had always thought that when pastor would decide to retire, he would come alongside us and help us to find a new pastor, because I valued his expertise, and he loved the Lord. And so it would have been just the ideal thing, but it didn't happen out that way.
No.
So.
Now, how did this guide come about?
Well, this guide came about because Bruce Craig was watching us as we were working through getting a pastor, and they had asked me to be the chairman of the Pulpit Committee, our church did, and I had worked for the Defense Commissary Agency for 35 years, and that old administrative hat came back on, and I said, you know what, we've got to have something to guide us. And I looked out there. There was one helpful resource, and that was through Regular Baptist Press. But even their book on calling a pastor wasn't really everything I felt it needed to be. And so I just sat down and with prayer, and it just all seemed to come together. So. And
what were some more of your resources?
More of my resources was talking to other people. How do you conduct a pulpit committee?
Because we will plug this this booklet, but I have never seen anything this comprehensive and really this good. It's amazing. So, and then also I was going to say, is the Apple Valley Baptist Church really, is that that's the Friendship Baptist Church or Fellowship Baptist Church? I mean,
we just put that new name
because
in
the Apple Valley Baptist Church gets 110 inches of snow every year. I was like, I only know one place in the state of New York that gets that much snow. And then I said something, and this is one of the brilliant things that's in there, is there's a statement about what the average snowfall is in the States, and then our average is 110 inches. I think the average is 18 inches.
Sure.
And then, but we get 110 inches of snow, and then also the average the sun shines for an average of X number of days in the United States. But here, I think it's 156 days, which would be a lot less. So, I mean, even in introducing your church, you're letting people know out of the blocks, hey, this is knowing about the weather.
We had a fella from Alabama, and he called me and said, Brother Bob, I just have to ask a question. Are those numbers for real? I said, yes, that's for real. He said, would you mind removing me from your list of candidates?
Yeah, see, that's beautiful. People need to know.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
You know, that sounds carnal, but it really isn't.
No.
I mean, you have to weigh all the parts, you know, all the pieces of the puzzle when you are seeking God's will. I was in northwestern Minnesota for 5 years, and twice we had major snow the first week of October, and it lasted till after Easter. I had a neighbor that raised goslings, and he said, wouldn't you like to have some to take to, Easter Sunday for the children's class? I said, great. I waded back to his farm, past my knees in snow to get those goslings to take to Sunday school.
On Easter morning.
After 5 years, after 5 years, I was having cultural shock, and it was just couldn't take it anymore.
No.
So it's good to be up front like that.
And so your pastor, who you ended up with, Brother Lee Pickett, and it's a great guy, but he moved south to take your church.
Yes, he moved south.
So,
And this year we had our share of snowfall. The 50-some inches Christmas Day, church got canceled, and because we had 50-some inches of snow in just a few short hours, it seemed.
You had 4 feet of snow sometime in October, I think, this last year.
Yes.
Right. And so in calling a pastor, that is something that you got to keep in mind, because you get up some guy from Florida, from the South, that winter could get to him, and especially his wife.
Pastor Pickett is used to the cold,
but not
he's
the snowfall.
not used to the snowfall.
Oh, is that right?
So yeah, they didn't get that much at one time up there, and so it was quite a reckoning for him. So.
Okay, so Pastor Craig, what do you got there highlighted? Let's introduce this book for the folks.
Might be a little premature, but I think it's awesome. I knew about the regular Baptist material. I had taken it and put together some ragtag things, and that's what I gave you. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't happy with it. And it's not that it was bad particularly. There were some things I didn't agree with. Obviously, that's why I changed it. But this is really needed. Our independent Baptist churches, that's exactly what we are. We're independent. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have the mechanics in place like a denomination or, a fellowship would have to do this. And I think a lot of our guys are pretty clueless as to what to do. I think that brings up another point, too, and that is our pastors aren't really preparing the churches for what to do if they die or if they move away or whatever, something happens. And to have this resource, in the church library or at hand, I think is invaluable. A lot of churches don't make it through a pastoral change.
It's a very dangerous time in the life of a church. How vital was it at your church to have Pastor Craig kind of to come in as a guide? How many times did you preach up there in the interim period?
I preached off and on for a little over a year. I was surprised at that when I looked at my notes.
Even during COVID, he came up and we did the parking lot with the FM radio station.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for men like Pastor Bruce Craig, I don't know what we would have ended up with. It was inspiring. I mean, the Lord just worked it all out. Here he is down in the Syracuse area. I'd never heard of him. And so I think it was through my daughter that she says, well, there's a Pastor Bruce Craig. And I said, well, I'd love to get somebody up here. And he helped to guide our church while he came and preached and give good sound advice. And the people were ready to ask him to be our pastor the second time he came to preach.
Sure.
Why can't we get him? Ask him, ask him. And but I think even if we had asked Pastor Bruce Craig, we would have gone through, especially as I went through the process, I think it's very important to continue to ask the type of questions that are needed.
Right.
It's helpful for the church to hear it themselves, And I think it helps the individual seeking the position that God's already, I believe, ordained them to hold, but it helps you to think through these things.
In Fellowship Baptist Church is a solid church, and you have deacons and you have faithful laymen that have come there for a long time. But still, at the same time, when you lost your pastor, you needed someone with experience. Pastor Craig has over 40 years of pastoral experience, been preaching for 50 years. And I know we have other men like that also in our state that help out churches in the interim period. But it's nice to have somebody from the outside kind of come in as a father figure. I know Brother Tom Stiles, who's out of our church.
Amen.
He's been up to your church a bunch of times, and he does that for a lot of churches too, just full of the wisdom of years of service, just to kind of help to bounce ideas off of, not like they're taking control of your church or anything, but kind of giving you wisdom and guidance. And here's an outside party with really nothing to win other than to win for Jesus and to kind of help guide a church in their search. So I would say that if your church was without a pastor, look to father type figures in your area that can help you. To just be a friend to your church.
Tom and I have collaborated on a number of these churches, and when I don't know the answer, I tell the deacons or whatever to call Tom.
Sure,
because and with much counsel make war.
Yeah, that's right.
But he is really a fountain of information.
So between Bruce Craig and it was Rich Overton, I believe you know Rich Overton.
Yes, I do.
And the night our pastor died, Rich Overton was there. And our pastor died at 6:00, and our service starts at 6:00.
Wow.
So he really, it was perfect. The Lord had him in the pulpit that night. He was able to provide a message of comfort, and then as we continued through the process to have men such as Pastor Bruce Craig and Rich Overton filling in, it was really, it made the journey more comfortable, and we were able to work through these things. And of course, I'm trying to pick their brains too. And at the same time, when I started putting this down, I wrote out everything. I said, because that's from my years with the Defense Commissary Agencies, I got to write this out. I got to know. And I think it's very important, as we all know, God is a God of order, and that we put things in order. This is our methodology. Is it the right methodology? Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. But you know what? As I would tell the folks as we would start another part of the process, I said, listen, this is not the law of the Medes and the Persians. Right. There are things like the King James Version. We're going to stick to our guns here. But if we come to you and survey you and ask you questions, please don't misunderstand what we're trying to do, because it doesn't mean we're going to go with a 39-year-old man versus a 59-year-old man. We want to make sure we're not limiting God, but we want to plan a methodology to work through this.
Right.
So we should never limit God. See, we might think we want a man this age. We might think, but God knows what we need.
Right. Oh yeah. So what are some of the protocols, or what are some of, like in your book, what are some of the things that you have laid out as far as a church going forward in search for a pastor?
I think it's very important to develop a document that says exactly what your authority is for doing this. Of course, and you go back to your Constitution and what it says, and I highlighted that in this how we're going to work through this, and then laid it out to the church, and everyone was supportive of it, that we have a methodology. This is how we're going to proceed, and this is what we're going to do, and trying to keep it as transparent as possible, and so we put everything we did in writing, so that I would be able to say, now this is what we've said we were going to do. This is how we're going to proceed. And again, I would always emphasize, but that does not don't hold me to the letter of this.
Right.
Because we have to allow God to work through this. And if we said, okay, we only want somebody that's done this and done this and done this, then wow, we just limited God on what he might have for us. So
I think your point about going back to your church constitution and doing it that way, even though it could even be flawed to some degree, I'm not saying unscriptural, but flawed as far as philosophy or, the way of doing things. I think that's very, very important because when somebody just starts, we're going to do it this way or my way or another way, that's when you're going to get a lot of conflict. But if you say, well, this is what the Constitution says we're supposed to do.
that's right.
The sad thing is a lot of churches can't even find their Constitution. You know what I'm saying? And so those things ought to be all taken care of at first as well.
What are some of the mistakes that you've seen
Well, I see
churches make?
One church is their Constitution was so fouled up, the name of the church and the Constitution wasn't even right. And then the pulpit committee / deacons, whatever it was they had, went through and started wanting to correct the Constitution or change the Constitution. And there were some other issues too. And when the pastor died, it let loose all kinds of snakes. And so the governing body, if you will, spent all their time trying to put out all these fires instead of focusing on the main thing. Let's get a pastor, let's get God's man. And I know myself and some others basically said, well, let's get a pastor and then let him help you work through these things. Because you get a pastor, he might want to change some things anyway. So you might as well wait instead of trying to solve all the church's issues in this interim time without, biblical leadership. So that I think that's really important. It's not to open too many cans of worms. Focus on the main thing.
And that's what we did. And when on page 1 here, the pulpit committee procedures, I wrote it all out. All the congregation got this. This is how your pulpit committee is going to proceed. But one thing in here, Bruce Craig, this is a quote from him.
Oh, no.
It's the calling of a pastor. He said it's one of the most crucial actions of a church. And he said, while there is good evidence that the early New Testament church selected their own pastor, no specific pattern of procedures outlined in the Bible.
Right.
And therefore, the autonomy of the local church gives us some liberty there.
Right.
But to make sure we understand that the Bible doesn't have a specific way that the local New Testament church has to proceed. Your church may be different than ours. But ultimately, we want the same thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and so we would come to agreement that it is going to be the congregation that is going to lay hands on the pastor, and there must have been some sort of a majority vote in Scripture, and so we will say that majority vote is going to be 75%, or some churches are 80%, and the same thing for removal of the pastor. Biblical constitution is going to have a vote to take their hands off of the pastor. I know ours is 75% in, 2/3 off. So,
And you wonder who came up with those numbers. Like
Right.
you said, Bob, it's a liberty thing.
Yeah. So
we're
it's just
autonomous.
there's biblical principle there.
Right.
And then however that fleshes out in your particular autonomous church is going to be up to whoever drafts your constitution. And, some sort of simple majority obviously is good.
We know in Acts 13 it said, "Look among you," or I'm sorry, Acts 6. Look among you and choose 7 men filled with the Holy Spirit. They became the deacons, and the idea there is by the raising of the hand. So they chose by the raising of the hand. If you get into the Greek, which is anathema to some of us, but that's what it means, by the raising of the hand. So the congregation voted on those deacons, and so you would assume they would if a pulpit became empty as well, that they had a vote. But in Acts 13, it was obvious that the missionaries were called of God and sent out from the local church.
The
church consented.
The Holy Spirit said to the congregation.
Right. The church consented to that.
Yes.
Yeah. So that had to be some type of a vote as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of all the pages in this book, and there's a lot of pages, you did a great job on this. And I only have one flag, and it's a minor
Isn't
thing.
it time for a commercial break?
Well, yeah, I'm a fundamentalist. If I can't find something wrong with something, and it's not wrong, but it's just something that concerns me. Maybe you have a workaround for this, but it talks about a questionnaire being passed out in the congregation, and the questionnaire is awesome. It really is. And then it says, let's see here. It says basically that the results of that questionnaire are shared with the congregation. I sort of think that's a dangerous thing. I think the questionnaire is great, and if the pulpit committee or deacons, whoever is doing this, looks over that questionnaire, I think they can gain some great wisdom. So all that's great. I'm not sure I'd share it with the congregation, and here's why. You get one guy that says, you know what, we need a praise band, and you share that with the congregation, and 3 other people say, yeah, that's a great idea. I know a church that did that. And another guy says, well, my uncle's got a smoke machine. I think he'd donate it to the church. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon you get a controversy going in the congregation from people that maybe wouldn't even have thought that way otherwise. So for me, I don't think I would share outside the pulpit committee those results.
I think that's good advice.
I mean,
it worked for us, and that it
may
not work in every situation. Right, and I think that's why when you bring these things up too, and because you have to decide how this works for you.
Well, sure. That's the only criticism I have.
I think the biggest thing with this is a tool to be thorough.
Right.
A lot of churches are not thorough before calling a pastor. Sometimes they just jump into it way too quick, and sometimes they take too long as well, and they're too particular. And a lot of times it's because whoever's running the church in interim likes the power too much, and they don't want to relinquish it to somebody. But a lot of churches don't. For instance, they don't interview a guy properly and ask him the right questions. Here you have questions laid out about the colleges. What fellowships do you associate with? Give us a summary of your conversion. What's your view on pastoral leadership? How do you view the role of deacons? What constitutes the local church? Like, all these questions are very, very important. Yes. And you practice open or closed communion? Well, what if your church is open and you get a guy come in and say, no, only those who are, and your church has open communion once a month on a Sunday morning? Then this new guy shuts that off, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. You've been closed, and then you get a guy in there that's open. What's your view on millennialism? Explain your view of the rapture. All these things are very important. And then you have this guy on record. You have him filling it out. You have the questionnaire right there. Security of the believer, all these different things. Views on divorce, that's important as well. All these things can be hobby horse issues to people. I think, but in perspective,
that's one
thing.
Examine them. That's one thing with Bob. He's not saying in this book, this is the way it's got to be, divorce, remarriage, whatever. Yeah. You're not making a statement.
But you at least know what the guy's views are.
You need to know.
Yeah, I know a lot of churches that had a problem because they found out later the pastor had been divorced. Well, right or wrong, the church had a right to know that, up front.
I think it's vital, even if you know the man. Now, Bruce Craig told us about Pastor Pickett, but we weren't going to stop the process of information flow. Right. He is going to answer every question, even though I trust his, recommendation, and right. We obviously pursued him, but he had to go through this whole process.
Sure.
That's good.
Now, how many candidates did you have in?
We had probably 25
25
total.
candidates.
Really?
But we visited, I sent information out. You'll see a letter there that I notified.
Brother Pickett should feel pretty good about himself,
right,
man.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, when you send out references to the people that he's worked with, you have to get more than one reference.
Right.
So
vital. Yes.
It's so important.
And you need to call references references.
Yes.
And if you know people in the area where the guy used to live, call those people and say, hey, have you ever heard of this guy? Yeah, you need to do your homework.
And then when you send a questionnaire to their pastor, They can't get out from that. That you've got to find out from the pastor. And you know what? We had a pastor from the South who contacted us in writing to tell us about this candidate we were possibly going to look at. We made piles of no, yes, and maybe. And, we just knew, okay, we're not even going to do these. And then I would go right to the letter sending them, thank you for your interest, da-da-da-da.
Yeah, so in this is a form letter in response to receiving an application from some. I mean, yeah, this thing is great. It's thorough.
So the pastor of this church that we were, if we had a maybe, in the maybe and yes piles, we wanted information from the pastors. And this one pastor, I'm telling you, it's so important to be honest. He said, and he said the things about this candidate and everything was, but he said in the end, he says, but I feel it's very important, and it's difficult to say, but we've had to put him on church discipline. Now, he looked good, guys.
Yeah.
And that's why getting information from the pastor.
I'll tell you a little background story real quick. I was an intern pastor for a year at Landmark Baptist Church in Michigan, and we had looked at 4 candidates. The first one was, man, he was really a sharp guy. He's about 33, 34, but he was assistant pastor for a big church and a really sharp guy. He came and everybody loved him, and they were hoping that he'd be the next guy, but he turned us down. So then the next guy was very young, inexperienced, not pulpit experience, young couple, and so the church turned him down. Didn't even call him back for a vote. Then we had a guy come in. He was too old. It was kind of like, this bed's too hard. This bed's too. But this guy was 65, very soft spoken, and he seemed even older than he was. It wasn't a robust 65. The church said no. The next pastoral candidate after this came highly referenced by the biggest IFB pastor in America at the time, who just got out of the penitentiary here locally, and then several other big names, but nobody from the town which he pastored. He pastored a real fast-growing church, got honorary doctorates, things like this, and so we called those references, but they weren't in close association with him. It wasn't people that were pastored by him. So what we did, well, actually, it was my father. He said, why don't you call Bob Parker? He was pastoring in Terre Haute at the time, and ask him if he knows anybody who knows this guy. And so I called Brother Parker, and he said, I want you to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Let me give you a few phone numbers. And I thought, this would be interesting. So I said, legal pad. And this guy, Brother Smith, was so sharp. He probably would have got 100% of the vote. Very dynamic personality, powerful preacher, was 100% a wolf in sheep's clothing, 100%. And, in Acts 20, Paul said, after my departure shall grievous wolves enter in from without and then from within. There's people in your church that have it's kind of like Satan. Until iniquity was found in him, they will rise up as wolves inside the church after the shepherd is gone. And so this guy, man, any scandal that you can think of in your mind, multiplied by about 10, and that was this guy. He would have been the pastor of that church had I only called the references on, and we're dividing up on the pulpit committee, but if we only called the references that he gave and not tracked down some more references, he would have been the pastor there and would have blown that church apart. Right. So it is important that you contact, and I've heard several times about churches who don't even call the references that are given by the guy.
Right, that's true.
On this, you have a questionnaire to ask the references when you call. So here it says, how long have you known the candidate and under what circumstances? What do you consider the candidate's strengths in the ministry? What do you consider the candidate's weaknesses in the ministry? What can you tell us about the candidate's family? How does the family contribute to the ministry? What can you share with us about the candidate's moral conduct and character and ethics? And the questions go on, which I think is phenomenal.
Yes.
And it's important as well that that you do this with every candidate, you know. And so you gather as much information on each one. We had a young man and sent me an email, please, I'd like to be considered for the position of pastor at Fellowship Baptist Church. And I knew this individual. And I said, I appreciate your interest. I will be sending you a questionnaire, blah, 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 blah. He sent back, why, you already know me. I said, we're going through a methodology here, and everyone's going to go through this. A couple days later, I got an email, please remove me from consideration.
There you go.
And that's what you want to happen.
Yes, absolutely.
And so...
And there's a lot of guys in your area, I don't want to call them vultures, but they're kind of like that, just, sitting around perched, not doing anything currently, waiting for something to open up. And that's not what you want either. You want a go-getter that's already doing something somewhere, not just waiting for somebody to die or whatever so they can move into a position.
I remember John Rice talked about that. He would talk about people, I'm called to preach. He said, our churches are filled with pastors that are called to preach that aren't preaching. He said, if you're called to preach, well, I don't have a place to preach. He said, there's a street corner.
Absolutely.
There's a park. If you're called to preach, you ought to go preach.
Nursing home, senior living, jail, you could preach every day of the week.
Remember the old cars before power steering? You couldn't hardly steer it at all when it wasn't moving. But when it started moving, you could steer it. Mm-hmm. And that's the way I think the Holy Spirit is with us.
Absolutely.
We expect God to, drop some wonderful thing in our lap when we're not even moving down the road.
No.
And it's not going to happen.
Faithful in little, I'll make you ruler over much.
Right,
yeah.
right.
And it's the law of momentum, the law of movement. Mm-hmm. Is that, the guys better be doing something now, because he ain't going to be doing, if he's not doing anything now, he's not going to be doing anything when he gets to your church.
I started out preaching in nursing homes. He's preached too fast. He preaches too loud. What's he saying? He sure has the gift of gab. Went through all that.
Sure.
And God just keeps giving you more and more opportunity.
Amen.
During the process, obviously, there's only going to be one that you call as your pastor. But it's important. I tailored this letter, the sample rejection letter, based on the Office of Personnel Management for the United States government, because I said, you're highly qualified. Listen, if these men come in and they've worked and they've given us all the information, they are highly qualified. And but we're sorry you weren't selected. The letter there it's very clear and it's polite. If you start getting calls like I did for one of these individuals, well, I'd like to know why you didn't select me. I'd like to know why. What was the problem? You mean? And I said, well, we made our selection and we appreciate. I just reiterated the letter. And he says, I don't know why you're scared to tell me. I said, I'm not scared to tell you. I don't have to tell you.
Right.
We've made a decision, and you are part of that process. So as politely as we could, we sent you a letter stating that. And that how much we appreciate and your interest in the church. But I'm not going to spend time going over why you didn't and why he did. And I think that's a big mistake. Don't do it. Because he called a couple times, and just have to put him back and listen, we've been through this. Again, we appreciate your interest, but we've made a decision and we've moved on. And you need to.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep. Oh, tell us about the thumb drive. You have a thumb drive that comes with it?
The written material I did at home, and Bruce Craig for sometimes, Bob, can you put something together? Can you put something together? I could use this as a tool. And my son, as I told you, he had fifth stage kidney failure, and we had to move quickly. We donated a kidney, I did, and then we had, of course, the other things. And so finally I said to my friend Dave Stonecipher, I said, Dave, I need help with this. Yeah, I'd love to help you with it. And he's the one that came up. He says, well, I think what would be very helpful is if you had on a thumb drive all these letters and everything in here. So all that church has to do is plug
Print
this
them out.
in on a Word document and the Excel sheets, as simplified as we can get it, and pull it up, change the name, you're all set.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great?
Beautiful.
Oh, it is. It is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I've been on pulpit committee before, and I think we were halfway organized, but nothing compared to this. And then also, just the questions in here are so pertinent. Again, it's not one stripe fits all. But here's some questions. So here is in the interview process when you have this man down, you're sitting down as a pulpit committee, you're asking him these things. Will you perform marriages of divorced couples in the church? That's an important
good
question.
Mm-hmm.
What's your approach to premarital counseling? What do you think about cooperating with other churches in the community, fundamental, evangelical, or liberal? What's your expectation in regards to deacons? What programs would you like to introduce to our church? All these things are very thorough, and a lot of pulpit committee people don't even know what to ask other than, did you read our Constitution?
Right.
Did you have any disagreements with it? And there's some guys that they really want to get a job, and they're not going to tell you what they disagree with until afterwards, after they get voted in. But here in this way, it's very thorough. And I know I would like to be asked these questions. I wouldn't mind that one bit. I'll just tell exactly what I think, and everything's up front. It's simple and easy, and we have a good relationship going forward.
the congregation also had the opportunity. We sent the written questions to him, but then the congregation had some questions they wanted to ask. If we already addressed it, I didn't ask the candidate to repeat it. If we have it in writing and he's already answered it.
Right.
But the questions they had, I also felt we should write them up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we canvassed the congregation about what other questions would you want in there. And they had some, and we included it. And so it gives the candidate time to also think about the question. And yet, when he did come to candidate, which, there was still some questions that still needed to be asked, and that's the time to ask them.
Well, how many of these have you given out now? This is brand new, so.
Brother, I think I've given out maybe 7.
Okay.
I just gave one to a church you preach at over
I know.
in Greg, New York.
There have been, I think, 3 churches I've gone in of late, and I'm all excited because I have this tool to give them. Oh, we already have that. It's like,
Oh, wow.
man, I'm not going to be a hero of that story.
But what we, with Dave Stonecipher, is we need him, he'll do them up. And, there's a little cost to putting this together, but we're not asking for cost. And, let's just do what we can as long as we can. And we felt that through Bruce Craig and even Rich Overton, some people we have had sweet success with in the pulpit, that they come across churches that need this, and that we would just make it available and give us a call. We'll do whatever we can to get it out to you.
Yeah, it is a super nice tool. If someone's out there listening and they want to reach out to us, you don't have the information, just email me at pastoralthoughtsmail@gmail.com. I won't send you my copy, but I'll get a different copy for you. But yeah, I think it's a phenomenal resource, and really I like it because it's almost above and beyond what you need. You'd rather have too much than too little, and it is. It looks like a government bureaucrat wrote this.
I would say, if you want it and you're going to use it, listen. Don't be intimidated by
You don't have to use any of it, but there's so many tools in there.
And use what is beneficial and helpful to you. But I have to state this: always require them to answer the questions, folks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful we did that, and so we have never had a problem, and that's not why we do it. We do it so we obtain the knowledge of how much this man knows.
Right.
But it also maybe have to be a tool that can later has to be used to say, now when you answered this question here, and now there's a problem. We want to eliminate that. It makes it easier all in the end. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, it's if you're calling a pastor, that's going to be a spiritual decision. But at the same time, God gave you a brain and also a Bible to judge all things by. And, you ought to, the old saying, work like it all depends upon you and pray like it all depends upon God. And this really would be just such an asset and a resource for Pulpit Committee to be thorough. And that way you're also, not only you're protecting your church, but you're also protecting whoever comes there. Because, you don't want to call a family there and he thinks you're one thing and you think he's something else, and, he moves his family there and it's not a match. Here you have good communication as filling out questions, and there's, responses, and you're just collecting, who this guy is and where you're at as a church and how things are going to line up. And at the same time, you're having your prayer meetings and things and going to the Lord and asking him to guide you and bless you at the same time.
I think another aspect of why this is so important is because I think it would help weed out the narcissists. Our pulpits, and you talked about wolves from within and without. Okay, that's very true. Our pulpits are magnets for narcissism. And I'm going to be the pastor. I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to be the smartest man in the room. I'm going to tell everybody how they should live and what they should do, and I'm going to be the boss. If a man won't fill us out and go through these stages, it's probably because he's got a problem with narcissism or some other defect like that.
He's not going to humble himself to answer these questions, when that is only fair to the congregation to tell them what you believe about things and see how things line up. It's only fair to them. It's only fair to you. So you would, because some guys are just they pastor at whim, like you said, and they just want to hear themselves talk.
Right.
And it is a dangerous thing. With you have to be a really weird person to want to get up in front of people and speak 3 times a week, or else you're cold
with nobody listening.
Yeah.
When I like all the cards on the table, and that's what this does. I know of a case. I guess I'll try to hide where it was, but the pastor, they called a young pastor. He's doing great. Church is growing. And one day his son walked in, and it was a son from another marriage who had, gone away from the Lord. And the people were shocked. And this is something they didn't know about.
They didn't know that he had a son.
Right. And it's basically, he ended up having to leave the church. Now, if he had been upfront about it, said, look, I had this child, whatever, I think probably he'd have still been the pastor of that church, but it was a shock to people. There was a church in Pennsylvania where the pastor's wife had been divorced, I believe it was. And when I talked to the pulpit committee, they said, if we had known that, it would have been okay. But he was trying to cover it up, and that wasn't okay. So something like this brings out all those little things that it may not be a showstopper, but people are aware, and they're not shocked when they find out this or that about somebody.
We had Pastor Pickett took a tour group to Israel recently, and there was a fellow that came down from Canada to go on this tour with them. And then I presented on a Sunday night the first time I got a finished copy of this. And I said, I'm pretty excited. I said, this is going to be a tool that Bruce Craig uses to get, as he goes into churches that are seeking pastors, he's going to be using this. So after the Sunday evening service, this man come right up to me and says, how do I get one of those? How do I get one of those? We're going to be calling a pastor soon. And I just handed it to him. And he just, hugged on me, thanked me like I was the hero of the hour. But
Canadians aren't even like that. So
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah.
so,
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for all your hard work, Brother Smith, and I believe the Lord's going to use this. This is just a phenomenal tool.
Yes.
And I haven't come across anything like this before, and so I'm glad guys know about it, and these fellas, especially in our state, who are going and filling in a lot of different churches. Of course, a lot of different churches right now are in need of a pastor, and I think that we got big churches, they need this, and then there's a lot of small churches too. A lot of guys that they don't have experience in calling a pastor. That's going to be a great aid and a help.
Yes.
So, good deal. Hey, thanks for being on. And I guess I was going to say, if someone wants this, email me. Or,
we'll get it to you.
Yeah, find out
And,
Lighthouse Bible Baptist Church, call the church, and we'll make sure to get you the copy of this and be a blessing to you that way. So, all right.
I want to thank Bruce Craig, Rich Overton, for their coming to our church, and it was really helpful to solidify the importance of this. And as it started to unfold, I didn't think it was that significant, but he and Brother Rich just said, "Come on, can you put something together?" Mm-hmm. And I got churches calling me already.
Amen.
And it's such a blessing to know it's going to be a helpful tool, and that God obviously uses his servants to unveil that this is a tool that can be used.
Yeah, and the guys that are interested in this, and I know I was telling my father about that too. He's like, "Hey, get me a copy of that," because he has not seen something like this either. So it's a blessing. I'm excited about it. The Pulpit Committee Guide. Man, you were going to be a famous guy, Bob Smith.
I already was famous, but we'll.
You mean infamous?
Infamous.
All right. Well, thanks for being on, gentlemen.
Thank you, Pastor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to the Pastoral Thoughts podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us at pastoralthoughtsmail@gmail.com. Also, if you want to check out more about our ministry here, you can visit pastorjack.org. I do have a blog that I do write. I'd love to have you as one of my subscribers there. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. God bless you.